What is good, guys? It is Reed and welcome back to another video. Today we got How to Make Your Magic Better episode 15 on justifications and how to use them in your magic effectively. I can't believe we're at 15 episodes. This is such a great series and one of my favorites on the channel, super valuable, and I hope you guys love it as well. But in this video we're going to talk about justifications, and not just in simple terms. We're going to dive into how you can use them, how to properly use them, and more importantly, how to create your own justifications. How logical do they need to be? Some approaches to come up with justifications, and the theory behind what they allow us to do and what they can actually allow us to get away with. And I think you'll be quite surprised to see with how much I believe in my philosophy that you can actually get away with. So if you guys like these type of videos and would like to see more, of course, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot. And if you're interested in checking out some private lessons, you can at the link below. So guys, with all that said, let's jump right into How to Make Your Magic Better episode 15 on justifications. So first of all, what do I mean by justifications? Justifications are things that we do as magicians, things we say, things we do to get away with many different things, whether that's hiding a move, making a move seem unimportant, making the spectator not question something that we do. And essentially it boils down to breaking that string of logic in their mind. So if you imagine they start with a premise, some premise that you've given them, something you're telling them that is true, and then your justification comes in the middle. That's the string that sort of attaches what that is to reality, right? So what you're telling them to be true, and is it actually true? They're sort of critical thinking on what you're saying, and the justifications is that bridge that kind of connects the two. And our job is to create a good justification that instead of a bridge is more like a mountain, something that they won't then cross over into the rational thinking. They'll just perceive your premise, see the justification, and believe it is true. They won't dive into the critical thinking side of what you're saying. So these things are super important, and nearly all magic tricks use a justification in some sense. And one of the forms those come as well, which is one of the biggest forms, is creating false memories. Justifications are incredible for creating false memories. If you think about that scenario I just laid out, if you have a premise and if you have what happened in reality, instead of a bridge, you put a mountain in between. Now they're not going to be able to fully remember what happened in reality, and we can convince them that things happen based on our premises. Essentially, in my opinion, justifications can allow you to really get away with anything, allow you to get away with murder, as they say. They're so powerful when used correctly, and in this video I really want to dive into how to do that properly and some different ways that you can actually focus and properly create well thought out justifications for your effects. Other things that justifications can allow you to do is use odd methods or do things that would otherwise seem to be strange. Like, why would he do this when he could have just done that? This is so much easier. No one ever does this that way. Why is he doing that? Well, likely it's because the method requires that, or there's some odd method involved that normally would look way out of place, so we need to now find a reason to make it not seem out of place, not stand out, and seem like a normal action and justify. So why is it important to create justifications and have good justifications in our magic? Well, it's important because it creates better effects. If we can create these false memories, have them forget things that aren't important, that is where our magic will be taken as simple tricks and simple effects that are what they are at face value, and camouflaging them and turning them into something way more powerful than they actually are at face value. Through manipulation of memories, we can achieve absolutely incredible things. I can think of countless times, nearly every time I do an effect and it's retold later, it is almost always not even close to what happened, or the important moments that would bring the effect into reality, or if you were trying to reconstruct the effect, the important moments you would need are always forgotten or blown out of proportion and made to seem way more amazing than they were. One thing you hear a lot that is very true is spectators, right, if they see magic, especially most people have not seen live magic still to this day, and when they're trying to recount that story, right, as humans we love stories, we want to tell engaging stories, we don't want to tell boring stories. So when they go to tell this story, they also want those people to be able to empathize and feel that amazement. So imagine you're there, you felt something amazing, you want to convey that, but it's hard to convey magic without showing it, right? And you're always worried that people are going to think, well, if that's, did he actually do that? Was it actually that cool? So they're going to embellish things without even knowing. They're going to make the story sound more exciting. And in the magic context, the way to do that is to ham it up and leave out things that would make it more plausible. So ultimately, using these justifications, we can also make our methods much more hidden and make backtracking much more difficult. If we can instill false memories, break the chain of what actually happened in their mind and leave gaps, it'll be impossible to backtrack the method. And finally, it's important to hide sneaky moves and more obvious sleight of hand or sneaky things that are happening, right? At the end of the day, some very useful moves are not that well hidden, and sometimes they're meant to be performed out in the open on the offbeat. You hear that sort of thing a lot. And this can come in the form of misdirection, audience management, but it can also just come as a justification. If you have a reason for doing what you do, you can do it in the open. There's no reason to hide it. You can just explain why you're doing it, and if there's a logical reason, people won't question it. Now, how to do it. So I want to start by telling you, and this is a general philosophy that almost always applies, people don't think too hard about what you have to say as long as it generally makes some sense or resembles some minor sense of logic. Okay, especially in the context of a magic performance where we're working through our pattern, we're moving, things are happening for them to focus on. As long as what you say can get within like 20% of a logical statement, something that just slightly will make sense, that they won't bother second guessing it, you will be fine and that will fly. And trust me, a lot of justifications that I've heard for tricks or things that I will say, if you really take a second to think about it, don't make a lot of sense, but they resemble logic enough that it's done. An example of something like this is when you're going for, say, a cull in an effect, and you need to spread through a deck of cards with the faces, and something you might say is, the spectator hands you the shuffled deck, they've named a card, and now you're going through the deck saying, as you can see here, the cards are well mixed. You can see they're all mixed up, all different orders. Of course, if they took a second to think about that, why, I just shuffled the deck. I know it's mixed. Why does this guy need to show me? I was the one who literally did the mixing. It's not like he did it and needs to prove it. So, logically it doesn't hold much weight if you take some time to really dissect what is happening and what is being said. But in the context, it happens very quickly, and it does make a little bit of sense when you just say it. I'm going to show you that the cards are mixed just to prove it one more time, right? And that's the sort of justification and some of the things that I'm kind of talking about here. Ultimately, you need to create reasons, okay? So when you have something that you're trying to justify, think of different reasons that you might do this thing. If it's a move that looks odd, one that comes to mind is a reversal. I think I learned it from Boris Wilde. So it's a card reversal where you reverse the bottom card, and you need to basically take the deck, flip it like this, and then flip it back over, right? And if you just did that move, it seems very odd. But the justification, I don't remember if this was his or if this is something that I came up with playing with it, but what you say now while doing it is, the card has been returned to the deck that they selected, presumably the one you're reversing, and you say, now look, you could have picked the 10 of diamonds, and you flip it over like this, or you could have picked the 3 of hearts, and in that you've reversed their card, and you just assemble the deck back. Now, if I was actually going to do that, why wouldn't I just spread and say you could have picked any of these? Why wouldn't I just cut to one? Why do I do this weird grip where I flip the cards like it doesn't make any sense? But a reason is created. I've now given a reason to do what I'm doing, and with my first point, it resembles some form of logic. I am showing them that they could have selected either card. That's fine, it's a true statement. And what it boils down to ultimately, as long as you're saying something that's true, it won't really be questioned. If you say something, obviously false, it's gonna set off red flags and alarms in people's brain, and then they'll start to think about it and maybe call you out. A format you can use is create your premise, or what is the thing you're trying to hide, or your goal, what is your goal, and then make sure that there is a logical tie, which is our justification, to this conclusion in the spectator's mind, right? So if we're trying to come up with a reason to go through the deck so we can execute a cull, that is our premise, that is our problem we're trying to solve. The conclusion or the goal is going to partially be tied into whatever our justification happens to be, but the end goal would be to get this moment to seem like nothing to the spectator. So now, when we think of different reasons, well, maybe we want them to focus on their card as we go through it. Maybe we want to show them the deck is all mixed. So those are two reasons. So let's look at each of those. If we want to go with the visualizing of their card, that can now be, the other part of our conclusion. After this moment happens, it would seem to them like a nothing moment, and we were just doing it to have them visualize their card. And now the justification, the bridge, is that logical sort of statement where we might say, well, a lot of people, they tend to forget their card, or if you're doing a mind reading effect, you could say, it's really important you have a visual image of that card. So one last time, I'm just going to go through the cards. I don't want you to say anything, but just see it and get that image in your mind. Now, that is a logical thing to say. If you were a mind reader, that makes sense to them. Now you go through the cards, you do your call, and to them, that whole premise is justified. If you went with the other approach, they shuffle the deck, you want to show that it's mixed. Your justification now could be, well, sometimes magicians might use trick cards, and I want to show you that not only are all these cards different, but they're not in any order. You shuffled, and I just want to prove to your eyes that they're not playing tricks on you, and they actually are. So if you take a look, you can see they're all mixed, and now that statement is a little bit more logical, a little bit more justified in their mind, and won't raise the red flags. Another thing you can do is actually create scenarios and fabricate scenarios that don't need to be there or wouldn't have normally been there to then create justifications within those, right? One example that comes to mind is something like a triumph, right? If you're not doing the triumph that I do where you can just let the spectator mix them all up, if you're doing something where you're doing some kind of false shuffle and you need to shuffle it, well, what's the reason for shuffling the cards face up and face down in the first place, right? We wouldn't necessarily want to say, I'm gonna mix all these cards face up, face down, then I'm going to fix them. You don't want to give away the ending because it'll hinder the effect. And while this isn't an example of justifying necessarily a method, it's now justifying sort of a premise, or it's allowing you to be the one to shuffle the cards to execute the false shuffle that you need. So in a sense, it kind of is, but we're creating a false scenario of why we're shuffling the cards face up and face down, right? A lot of magicians use the old, I was at a bar one night, some drunk guy took my cards and he shuffled them face up and face down like this. And because you're now showing what happened and you're telling a story, it makes sense that you could be the one showing what's happening, demonstrating that shuffle, allowing you to get away with the false shuffle. And another example of these sort of scenario fabrications is anytime we have them do some odd cutting process or some weird selection process that isn't, something typical because it's part of the method, we generally create some sort of scenario, whether it's like we're going to play a game where we're cutting packets, or we're going to see how close you can get to cutting in half, or we're going to have you cut the deck and turn it over, and then have you cut it and turn it over again because of whatever scenario we create. So you can actually fabricate yourself a justification out of thin air that wouldn't have normally been there, which is kind of cool. And then you could just lie, right? You can just lie, and a lot of justification is a lie in a sense, right? It's a white lie, but you can straight out just lie, again, as long as that lie resembles some truth. If you have to have a dribble for your force or whatever, and you want to justify why you're dribbling and not spreading, right? Like even imagine a scenario a spectator asks, well, all magicians have me pick cards like this, so why are you doing it like this? It doesn't seem as fair. You're now in a bind and you need to come up with a justification. Just lie. I would say, I used to do it like this, but people would always either take the top card, take the bottom card, or they'd grab a handful, and then later they'd complain that, oh, that was too easy because you just knew what the top card was. So I like doing it this way, and now it makes you choose a card somewhere in the middle, and it's actually a bit more random because not even you know which card you're going to take, so how could I know, right? That doesn't make any sense if you really think about it, but it's a good lie that would just fly in the moment. You can think about all of these from the audience's perspective and really get a sense for what is what, if you put yourself in that third party position, is this something that if you had no magic knowledge would generally make some sense and would fly over your head. At the end of the day, I would recommend you don't stress too much about all the different holes in your statements, right? If we take that last statement where I talked about the dribble versus the spread, well, of course, this doesn't make any sense that because they don't know what card it is, I couldn't know what card it is. Of course, I could know what card it is still. It doesn't make it any more fair. They don't know what card it is when I spread either, right? There's all these holes, and if you sit there obsessing and thinking over all these holes, of course you're not going to get anywhere, but you have to understand in the context of a magic performance, with the, you know, the beats and everything going, the performance going on, people engaged in what you have to say, your confidence with your delivery, and the lack of, you know, really analytical thinking the spectators are going to do about statements that seem so unimportant, you'll be totally fine. And my final tip is to gloss over these statements. A lot of the times they're just little short statements that I just throw in and move on straight into the next thing. There's no pause, there's no downtime. It's just something that is like a bridge from one part of the effect to the next, to allow me to get into some handling or something that I need to do or say. Gloss over it, and most importantly, say it with confidence, because if you believe it, they will believe it too. I want to make a quick point of saying I truly believe you can get away with anything with the right justification. A saying that I love to say is there's a justification for anything, and that is absolutely true. I've still yet to be shown something that can't be justified in a certain way. You can always come up with some kind of reasoning, no matter how crazy it is. You can tie it back into making some sense of logic and something that the spectators won't think about as long as you put enough effort in. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm saying people are stupid, right? I'm not saying if people are dumb, so it's easy to put things past them, because of course that's not true. Only half the people are stupid. But I'm saying that their attention is going to be somewhere else, right? I'm not calling them dumb. It's just they're not focused on these things. Their attention is focused on other things, and oftentimes it's catching you out, figuring out how you did that magic trick, not did the statement you say make full, complete sense. And another thing too, if you gloss over these statements, you won't give them time to interject and say, hey, wait a minute, if you're already on to the next thing, their brain will be thinking about that. At the end of the day, if you make the magic amazing, they won't even think to remember about the moments leading up to it that maybe didn't make perfect sense in your justifications, right? It won't even cross their mind. They'll be too amazed at how did you do that, and the overall euphoria and amazement that you feel when an effect is truly amazing and the magic is great. Some examples of justifications is something like an effect Guess Who, right? Guess Who is a propless name divination that I've performed many times on the channel. I'll post a performance here, but this is an effect that relies on you limiting the amount of names they can think of. If I were to just tell them, think of a name, right? I have no now bounds of how I'm going to guess that name, but Guess Who, you need to justify this a little bit odd, well, quite odd process. We're using numbers to get to names, which is very important for the method, but why wouldn't I just have them think of a name, right? If I was going to read their mind. So we now justify that by saying, you know, if I were to ask you to think of a name, most people go for people that they know, people that are close to them, and I don't want you thinking that there's any way that, you know, maybe I went on Facebook and I looked up people you know, or I have any idea what that name could be, right? It's a perfectly logical, great justification. Now, if we dissect it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would they pick someone that they know if they're trying to have me mind read it, right? Most people are going to try to pick something difficult. So it doesn't make sense. Of course, even if I saw their Facebook friends, it's not really going to help me. People have thousands of friends. It's not going to help me guess who they're thinking of, right? These things don't make sense when you break it down, but in the moment, the spectators just accept it and go through with your premise, and it makes the whole effect feel amazing. By the end of it, they don't even remember that we talked about that. All they remember is, I thought of any name, and this guy somehow guessed it. Another thing is another Boris Wilde effect called Name My Card. It's a do as I do type effect, and at the end of the day, it uses a marked deck, and you need to peek the marking. And how I do it is I just have them, we each get a half. They shuffle it, and when they're confident with the card that's on top and that there's no way I could know it, they stop and set the deck down on the table, and then we both take a peek, kind of poker style. Now, I justify this by saying, you know, I really don't want anyone to see, so you're just gonna take a tiny peek at the card like that. Really, when it's on the table, I have perfect vision. I can control where the cards are placed generally, so I always know I will have a clear view of that marking. It won't be like in their hand and maybe they have their hand tilted like this and I won't be able to see it. Now I have to create some reason for them to lower their hand. It's always in my control that way. Through a justification, that is questionable. One thing that's always justified is writing things down in mentalism. Why do we always have people write things down? And there's so many justifications. I've talked about a ton of them in my Billet Mentalism 101 video, all about billet work. But whether you want them to visualize on what it is they're thinking of, or you want them to show other people in the group so everyone can be involved, whatever it is, there's tons of reasons that we have people write things down and justify things in mentalism. Now, how to improve at justifying your routines and creating justifications? Well, ultimately you want to practice these things. You want to try out justifications in the real world and see for yourself that it's not something to be worried about and that it can very easily be done. And then when you start to see how much you can manipulate people's memory, ask people after an effect, can you just describe that effect back to me? And you'll be amazed if you do it right at how much you can manipulate what truly happened. Another thing that I actually used to do that was kind of fun is I would create odd scenarios or put myself in binds live in performances just to see if I could justify my way out of it. And you don't have to do this purposely. Sometimes I would, but you can do it by accident. Well, it's gonna happen by accident when you make mistakes, when things go wrong. You're gonna need to find a way to save the effect, and coming up with justifications on the spot is something you're gonna need to do. And that is a very important skill to have, and it just comes through practice of being able to create justifications on the fly so that when you're put in situations you can justify your way out of it and make someone do something to save the effect or do something that normally would be strange, right? I've created so many random justifications that don't make any kind of sense just on the spot that just work to get me to my end goal of saving an effect. You can also kind of do this theoretically and just think through it in your mind, right? What would happen if I lost their card on a control? Well, maybe I'll ask them to tell me so that I can do something with it. Or maybe I'll have them pick a new card. Well, if I want to have them pick a new card, what could be the justification? Maybe you make a joke out of it. Maybe you say, I have a good feeling about your card. I think it's going to be really special in a bit. So we're going to actually save this card for later. Let's pick a different card while I do this and we'll come back to it. Do you come back to it? Maybe, maybe not. But the point is you've now made a reason to move on with the trick to another card and something that will make sense to them. Making mistakes, like I said, failing is obviously and ultimately the best way to get this practice and finding your way out of it, but developing this skill is super important. Performing, of course, extremely important. As always, it'll give you those mistakes, it'll give you that real world testing, but also you can script out your performances and get a good sense for how they'll play out and work through how you'll justify different things. Actually, take pen to paper or thumbs to screen and type out some of your scripts, and you can work in the justifications really nicely that way. So guys, that is it for Mentalism 101 episode 15. Man, this was an awesome episode. It just kept getting better the more I talk. I have my notes for all these episodes, but they often turn out way, way better than I expect. I just, as I start talking, things flow and I get into a good groove. So this was another one of those videos. Absolutely awesome. I hope you guys loved it as much as I did. Of course, don't forget to hit that like button, drop me a comment, let me know what you thought, and subscribe to the channel, turn on that bell so you don't miss any more videos. If you'd like to check out some private lessons below, you can. And I just want to thank all the new subscribers. I really appreciate you. And with all that said, guys, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video.